Okay, my father was arrested on the night of the broken glass, November 9th, 1938. Why was he arrested? Because he owned a store. The German government had passed the Nuremberg laws, which were specifically aimed at making life impossible for Jews. A long list of all kinds of normal civil rights were taken away from the Jews. But one of them was using hospitals. So I was born at home. And my mother decided that if she has to have a birth at home, she didn't think my older sister, who was only 4, should be present. So she sent her to her aunt, a loving aunt, but it wasn't only a day or 2 or 3, it was 6 weeks. And that's a long time to send a young child away and without an explanation. And at that time, in the middle 30s, people did not have the same awareness of psychology that we all have today. And no one realized that this would be harmful to Susie psychologically. Anyway, eventually, when Susan was 6, she was sent to school. And schooling for Jews was also forbidden by the Nuremberg laws. So she was a few weeks in school, and then she got kicked out along with all the other Jewish children. It doesn't matter what kind of a school it was. I don't know if it was a Jewish school, a private school, a public school. All the schools were not allowed to have Jewish children. And no one explained to her, I don't know if she would have understood what Nuremberg laws are anyway. But she was left with a feeling that maybe she had been a bad girl. It did something to her. And the next thing that happened was, as I said, the night of the broken glass, when my father was arrested. Why was he arrested? A Jew was not allowed to own a store. Someone in the neighborhood where the store was in Dortmund, Germany. I was born in Dortmund, Germany. Someone had told the Nazi police who were running around looking to break into shops and to arrest people, that store over there is run by a Jew. Therefore, in the middle of the night, my sister Susan woke up from noises in the street, and not knowing what it was, she ran to my parents' bedroom to wake them up. In the meantime, the Nazi German police, I don't know if they were police or army or what they were, they broke into the store, they wrecked the store, and we were sleeping and living in an apartment over the store with an internal staircase between the 2 floors, and they came up to arrest him because he owned a store. It's a terrible crime. He owned a store.
As a Jew.
As a Jew. As a Jew, video. And he had the instinct to grab his winter coat, and when they tossed him down the steps, as a procedure in arresting a person, you have to throw him down the steps. I never knew that. But he, fortunately, was wrapped in a heavy winter coat, so he did not break an arm and a leg. This made an impression on my mother, because years later, she would remember to mention it, that he had taken his coat. He was dragged off to a low, at that time there weren't camps, I'm talking about 1938. The camps, concentration camps, extermination camps had not been established yet. He was taken to a small local jail in Dortmund. And it was close enough that my mother could walk over there the next morning and bring him some clothing. He'd been taken in his pajamas. And she also brought in his watch. And some kind guard said to her, don't give him the watch. He's not going to have it very long. We're going to take all these guys to some work camp where they're going to work. They took the clothing for him. And she went home and she suddenly realized that things were much worse than she'd realized. She hadn't realized what's happened. When you're in the middle of something happening, you don't know what's happening. Today we look backwards on history. But her first concern was the children. I was 2.5, and my sister Susan was 6.5. And her first thought was, bad things are happening, I have to get my girls out. How can she get her daughters out? My mother always looked for solutions. This was not a woman who would just sit home and weep, my husband's in jail. She looked for a solution. She started asking and getting advice from friends and neighbors and relatives. In the end, she realized she has relatives in Belgium. And when I talk to young people, I hang up a big map because they're a little hazy with the geography. But Belgium is right adjacent to Germany. And the area where we were living, Dortmund, is adjacent to quite close to the border in the direction of Belgium. So she called up these people in Antwerp, and their name was Frisch. I can't remember the first name this minute, it'll come to me. And they said, yes, we'd love to take your girls. They also had 2 girls. They knew that things were not easy. Nobody knew what the future would hold, but in the meantime they agreed. Now, how do you send 2 little girls from one country to another? My mother could not accompany them because Jews were not allowed to travel in any method. One of the Nuremberg laws. So she spoke to them, and they made up a good plan. They had a woman that worked for them as a children's nanny, children's nursemaid, and they gave her the documents belonging to the 2 Belgian girls, Denise and Susan. What was her name? One was Denise. She came on the train from Belgium to Germany, and my mother met her and handed us over to her. Now, I'm a little girl. I don't know who this strange lady is, and she's speaking Flemish. That's what they speak in Belgium. They speak some French, but they speak Flemish, and I'm speaking German, and my mother doesn't explain. She kisses us goodbye, I suppose. And off we go on a train to a different country. And she has to be very brave to do this, because she had no idea when she'd see us again, but she wanted to make sure our lives were safe. So she did something very unusual for a woman in those days, and to make up her own decision by herself without her husband. That wasn't done in those days. Husbands were very much in charge of each family. How could she have his advice if he's sitting in a jail somewhere? So she decided to do this on her own. I mean, she had some support from some of her relatives, but her own parents, my grandparents, had left Germany in 1933 and gone to Israel, which was then called Palestine, because my grandfather felt that there was something very wrong in the forthcoming government of Hitler. And he decided it was time to leave Europe, to leave Germany. So my mother made this big decision, and she sent us with this woman. And we're riding along, and the nanny was very clever. If someone asked her, what are you doing with these kids? She would give them a nice made-up story that she came to Germany to have us see some special doctor. I don't know what supposedly was wrong with us. And she was taking us back home to Belgium. Obviously, I couldn't open my mouth and speak German if I'm supposed to be a child coming and going from Belgium. And I, as a 2-year-old, the natural tendency is to chatter away. And my sister Susan, from some instinct, would shush me. And when we arrived, my mother got a phone call. Yes, we had phones already in those days. Not like we have today, but we had phones. My mother got a phone call that we had arrived safely.